years, Russian athletics has not met the bar for clean competition, but the country has just taken a big leap in getting over it. The World Anti-Doping Agency has decided Russia can be trusted to test its own athletes, and that makes an Olympic return a possibility.
To be honest, we are all dreaming about that, and judging by the latest news, it's not too bad. Everything is okay, and hopefully things are about to get even better. And since we are temporarily disqualified, let people outside of our country be jealous that we have such cool competitions here.
Russians have had to compete as neutrals after major doping allegations were first revealed 4 years ago. But last week, Moscow handed its blood samples and data to WADA after years of pressure. But the problem for Russia is the scale of alleged wrongdoing. According to WADA, the cover-up was organised from this laboratory. Tainted blood samples taken from scores of athletes were allegedly hidden via a state-run programme. But even if that's never proved, it may take fans many years to trust Russian athletics again.
Were you the mastermind that cheated the Olympics?
Yes. I was helping to facilitate one of the most elaborate doping ploys in sport history.
Documentaries like Netflix's Icarus showed how Russia's anti-doping agency was masterminding the doping. So WADA's decision to reinstate them has caused anger. The US anti-doping agency described it as a devastating blow to clean athletes, but Russia's athletic federation say they have changed.
In the last 2 to 3 years, we've taken measures, including legal changes to tighten the fight against doping, extra education and a drive to change the culture among athletes. And most importantly, this change of culture is happening not only among top athletes, but right down the chain to younger athletes.
It will now be down to the governing body for World Athletics to decide whether Russia will return to major events. And even the idea of that is putting an extra bounce in Russia's step.
Well, I'm delighted to say that the man whose report exposed the extent of the Russian doping scandal, Richard-mclaren, is with us now to discuss this in more depth. Mr. McLaren, thank you very much for talking to us here on Beyond the Game. As we mentioned, it was your report that exposed the scale of Russia's state-sponsored doping operation. We've seen that the suspension on Rusada has now been lifted. Do you feel that justice has been served?
Well, that's not a judgment that I necessarily would make or should make. I was asked to investigate to see if there was some system operating at Sochi, and if there was there any other systems operating within the country? And I found the answer to both those issues. Yes, there was a system operating at Sochi, and yes, there was something going on in the Moscow lab, which was rather unexpected at the time it was discovered. And I was to report on that, and that's what I did. And now the issue has become one of finding particular athletes who have possibly committed doping rule violations. That was never part of my work. That's WADA and the IOC turning a system-wide investigation into a look for individual athletes who may have committed anti-doping rule violations.
When WADA allowed Rusada back into the fold in September, there was a roadmap to compliance, as they called it. It was dependent on receiving that data and also accepting the findings of your report. Have you had any indication, have you seen any evidence that Russian authorities have accepted the findings of what you published?
No, the Russian authorities, as far as I know, have not accepted what I found in the 2 reports. What they have done and what triggered WADA's change of its roadmap in September of 2018 was the fact that Russia was prepared to acknowledge that the report, which was prepared by a man named Schmidt for the International Olympic Committee, they would accept what was said in that report, which incidentally was almost exclusively reliant on my own work with some limited further work of their own. So effectively, they have acknowledged in that way what I had to say, but not directly, but indirectly through the Schmidt report, which is really, as I said, based on the work I did.
WADA has been criticised by some athletes and some other national anti-doping agencies for perhaps being seen as too weak on Russia. Other than extending Rusada's suspension, what other options are or were open to WADA at this time?
Well, that's been the problem all along, because there's been a very limited set of options available to WADA, and the option that was added in April when they had the international compliance standard developed, which allowed sanctioning of individual countries, which they didn't have the power to do before that. So that's April of last year. When I was doing my work, they didn't have that sort of authority. The only bodies that could have precluded athletes from competing would be the international federations. You were referring earlier to the International Athletics Federation, who did ban the Russian athletes from competing, or a body like the International Olympic Committee or the Paralympic Committee, who could ban individual countries from participating.
Mr. McLaren, I just want to play you a short clip from former British 400-metre runner Jamie Bolsh. He said, he told this programme that he's disgusted by what's happening to his sport at the moment. Let's take a listen to exactly what he had to say.
Yeah, from my point of view, it's disgusting, really. You know, it just keeps happening time and time again. You know, being a world silver medalist getting upgraded to a world gold medal in the 4x400 metre relay. I know from an athlete's perspective what it's like to miss out on a drugs allegation.
So, Mr. McLaren, I suppose my question is, we are at this point in time, with Russia now being welcomed back into the fold, certain criteria permitting, of course. What can WADA and the sports federations do now to ensure that the integrity and trust is restored back into the Olympic movement and athletic competitions that we try and enjoy as fans?
Right. First, might I say I share the reactions of that athlete with respect to the impact that it's had on clean sport athletes all over the world. And what can we expect in terms of building the credibility of WADA? I think they need to pursue as rapidly as possible the data that they now have from the Moscow lab and connect it with the information that I originally discovered and then they captured in October of 2017. And if there are, as I expect there will be, infractions by specific individuals in that information, that's pursued rigorously by WADA, and where the international federations fail to act to determine whether an athlete should be sanctioned, that WADA pushes the federation very hard to do so, because they're the bodies that actually have to implement the outcomes of all of what WADA has been doing in the process of trying to reinstate Rusada.
Okay, Richard-mclaren, thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you for your insight.